Hello, and welcome to Get Focused Millennial Matters, Episode 8, Suspending Educational Inequity from Public School Systems. I am your host, Denise Hernandez. Our organization, Growing Empowered Together, or GET for short, connects the dots between personal experiences and public policy in order to motivate more young people to vote and volunteer in Texas. Today's feature highlights two inspiring professionals from San Antonio who have devoted their impressive array of talents toward ending educational inequities in Texas. We'll talk with them about what educational inequities look like in the San Antonio school systems and discover who is impacted by these inequities the most. We'll learn about the important work that our two guests are doing to help ensure that all students receive a quality education in our public schools, and we'll find out how you can help. Fatema Basrai graduated from UT Austin and is currently working toward her MBA at UTSA. She taught school on the west side of San Antonio and serves now as Executive Director of Leadership SAISD. Fatema was named to the prestigious Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2018 for her work in education. Chellie Fernandez earned a master's degree from the University of Chicago in Social Service Administration. She taught middle school in San Antonio as a Teach for America Corps member and currently works as a program manager with My Brother's Keeper San Antonio. Welcome, Fatema and Chellie. Thanks for being here. Fatema, what does the term educational inequity mean?
So educational inequity is really a system of inequities that have taken place in our public school systems. It basically means that depending on where you live, your zip code, maybe your parents' earning status, you have a very different experience in the education system than your neighbors, even people who live in the same town as you, who live in another part. You would have a very drastically different experience, even though both of you could go to public schools.
Awesome. So whose responsibility is it to keep tabs on whether or not educational inequities in San Antonio, if they keep spreading or if they stay, where does that responsibility lie?
Yeah, well, in San Antonio is really unique because we have a lot of school districts. Each school district is responsible for their own jurisdiction, but really the responsibility lies with all of us. All of us as voters, as citizens, have a responsibility towards students in our city. And as voters, depending on the districts we live in, we vote for our school board representatives who play a huge role in the students' education. So we all have a responsibility at the end of the day.
Wonderful. Do educational inequities exist in San Antonio's public school system today? You touched on that a little bit. And if so, can you give us a sense of what they look like in everyday, in the classroom and the bigger system?
Yeah, definitely. San Antonio definitely has a lot of educational inequities, and it's very clear to see. I mean, as soon as you start driving into different school districts, you can see just by looking at the school buildings how different they are. So in the heart of the city, in SAISD, at the schools on the west side, you'll see buildings that have not been updated for decades, bad infrastructure, bad roads, no proper lighting even around the schools. And then you can drive about 15 minutes, 20 minutes north, and in the northern school districts, north side and northeast, you can see school districts that have had huge updates to their football stadiums, multi-million-dollar updates. Mm-hmm. So those are just, some physical inequities, but even with instruction, with access to school programming, things like art, PE, you'll see that wealthier school districts just have many more opportunities for their students.
So Chellie, there have always been disciplinary problems with some students in public schools, in all schools really, but how we handle them has changed over time. So can you please explain what the school to prison pipeline is for people who may not know, and what led to it and to its formation?
Absolutely. So the school to prison pipeline essentially is showing the correlation between students being suspended and possible mass incarceration later on down the line. Mm-hmm. What we've seen is through the war on drugs and the zero tolerance policies that have grown out of national policy, how it's turned around and impacted our schools. And so what we see is punitive measures being taken to simple and minor infractions in a school setting that have escalated into this approach that says we want to just kick students out instead of actually working with them through the behavioral issues that we're seeing.
Okay. Which demographics of San Antonio student population are typically hurt and which are helped by the pipeline and educational inequities?
The ones that are definitely impacted the most are going to be our Black student population. For Region 20, they only make up 6% of the population. However, they make up 12% of the out-of-school suspension rates.
Wow, and that kind of mirrors, I guess, the arrest rates of adult Black folks as well, right?
Absolutely. We're going to see that Black and brown bodies are arrested at higher rates and incarcerated as well. So we do see that correlation there.
So how does the experience of being caught in the prison pipeline typically impact a student's opportunities and quality of life after their suspensions or arrests?
So what we are seeing based off of dropout rates is that individuals who end up dropping out of high school, they typically have already been in the school to prison pipeline, right? So they've been suspended previously before, whether it's out of school or in school. And currently, Bexar County is looking at a 16% dropout rate. And we have to start questioning, what are our schools looking like and how are they supporting youth before they decide to drop out? We also should question, what can we do to keep them safe when they have dropped out, and really thinking about how to bring them in.
Right. Okay, Fatema, people often advise researchers to follow the money in order to identify the source of a problem. So if we were to follow the money in the Texas educational system, would we find any root cause of the educational inequities?
Yeah, so Texas is interesting in the sense that a lot of our schools are funded by property taxes, so we can see infrastructure really affecting schools and school funding. So if we go to one side of town and there's not that many homes, or the homes have a lower property value, that school district is going to be funded at a much lower rate than the schools on a side of town that have higher property values. We also see a lot of special federal grants and federal monies that come in year by year, but those aren't always guaranteed. So for one year, you could get a huge federal grant that helps pay teachers extra for tutoring or something, and then the next year it could be gone, and then you don't have as much tutoring. So the federal government also really plays a role.
Wow. Do educational inequities only affect the students who lived in these underserved communities, or does it also have an adverse effect on the larger community and the welfare of San Antonio, the state, the country, the world as a whole?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not just students who are affected. It perpetuates a cycle of poverty. So you'll have students who grow up in bad school systems who maybe don't get to realize their full potential. They keep living in the same neighborhoods, perpetuating that same cycle of poverty, and affects their families for generations. Well, we can see in San Antonio there are some families that have lived in the same neighborhoods for generations, and they haven't broken that cycle of poverty. So I think the school system is a great first step in kind of moving people out of the cycle of poverty.
Absolutely. And Chellie, can you give us a sense of the types of problems that some students face at home that maybe lead them to misbehave at school?
Absolutely. So if we think about the population in San Antonio and in school districts that are typically underfunded, it's going to be school districts that are serving right around, anywhere between 60% to 100% living in poverty. And when we think about poverty on a basic level of trauma, saying that anybody who's been impacted by poverty, having your food insecurity, having unstable housing, having less access to quality health care, those are all things that impact your overall well-being. And so when youth come into a school setting and haven't ate all weekend long, I'm irritable if I miss one meal. I can only imagine what it's like to go a whole weekend, or to think about home and some of the struggles that they're trying to overcome in those settings, which could vary for every individual, but it can be from anything from a parent working really late at night, so I stay up and take care of the younger sibling, or maybe I'm not staying at home and I'm out doing things I shouldn't be. Either way, those are things, sleep deprivation, that impact how I perform the next day at school. And so those are things that we need to start thinking about when we see a disruptive behavior in the classroom. Start asking those questions of what else is there? There's a deeper root cause.
Right, okay. Fatema, you've devoted your professional career to creating a positive learning experience for all students. Do you have a personal story that led you to feel so strongly about the importance of educational inequity issues?
Yeah, I grew up in a very rural school environment and still public schools in Texas, and it wasn't until I got to college at UT that I really noticed the inequities in my own education. So I went to a public school. I was a valedictorian of my class, and I felt very confident in myself. And then I got to UT, and I saw that other kids who had gone to public schools had just had so many more experiences. And that didn't make sense to me because we had both gone to a public schools, we had followed the same state standards, so why was their experience so much better?
Our country suffers from a variety of different types of social problems, including homelessness, poverty, gun violence, and unfortunately many more issues. So how important a role do you think that public education plays in the broader struggle to create an equitable society overall? You kind of touched on that a little bit. But
Yeah, I think education is the first step. I mean, it opens up so many doors, and once you're more educated, I think you're able to really have a better balanced view on social events, and you can think through problems. You learn to communicate with people who have different opinions. And I think a lot of the problems that we see in the country and in the world right now are because people don't know how to communicate with other people and don't know how to build bridges. And I think that we can do that if we start by educating students.
And would you say that education has played a significant role in your life and even in your personal and professional life both?
I feel very fortunate that even though the education I received in high school was lacking to a certain extent, it still opened up so many doors for me, and college definitely opened up doors for me. And it's just really a privilege to get to teach and to lead people and work in education. And I think that it's probably the most rewarding job.
Awesome. And Chellie, how about your educational goals? Has this helped you in your professional and personal life?
Absolutely. I'm very privileged to be at the educational level that I'm at, and being able to say that I've attended major universities that have contributed to the work that I get to do and I love, but it's also very personal as well, right? So because of the way that my family's had to navigate certain struggles, not everybody gets to be here where I'm at today, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be on this journey, but it's literally because of the steps that I've taken in education that has pulled me out of poverty and has put me on a different trajectory than some of my other family members who maybe became part of the school to prison pipeline.
I see. And can you tell us more about the challenges that students face as they re-enter public school after detention, suspension, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. So typically what I have seen happens in a non-restorative setting is a student just comes back from suspension, whether it's 3 days, 2 days, a day, an in-school suspension, and you just go about your business. The child just comes back into the classroom, they go through their day like nothing happened. But really something did happen, right? If something has happened to where we've removed you from your school community and say you need to be completely separated and you need to isolate yourself, we need to actually have a conversation about what that looks like. So in a restorative justice model, what we would say in a school setting is, how do we sit this youth down with adults who really care about this youth and what happened with the problem? How do we also save space to make sure whatever harm was done is corrected and there's some accountability after that? This could be just with a person who's committed the crime, or it could also be including whoever was harmed by the crime as well, and whatever community as well. If it happened in a classroom setting, we need to address it with the entire classroom. If it happened with just a teacher and a student, we need both of them to have an opportunity to come together and address what has happened. And I want to be clear that in some cases, things are escalated by school staff as well, and we need to address harm both ways, whether it's just the student and the adult, or student, adult as well.
Wonderful. Can you tell us about the work you're doing with the Reentry Circle and how it helps?
Absolutely. So again, with the Reentry Circles, we're going to do the circle process, which is an indigenous practice where we all come together as a community and address what needs are there, what feelings have happened, and how do we correct the behavior that's happened. And sometimes correcting that behavior is addressing what I mentioned earlier around trauma, is maybe there is a skill that's missing that because of what's happening at home or in the community that's impacting their ability to function in school. What are wraparound supports that we can offer this child? And so the Reentry Circle is really a process for us to all come together and rally behind this student and say, we're not going to dismiss you. Actually, we're going to face this conflict head on, because that's part of restorative justice. Like, we sit in tension, and tension's okay, but how do we support you in moving forward?
It's wonderful. So is there data to compare the effectiveness of zero tolerance versus restorative justice practice in San Antonio, or is it more at a state, national level?
Right, so what we're doing with My Brother's Keeper right now is collecting data from Region 20, and also as our partners see fit, they're offering up data as well. On a national scale and a state scale, we can see that males, and particularly males of color, Black students in particularly, are impacted at higher rates. And it really begs the question of, are schools really safe for these youth? Based on zero tolerance, they're not, if they're being suspended and dropout rates keep growing, as well as incarceration rates. Now with restorative justice, what we've been able to see is there is a lot higher of satisfactory from those who've been harmed, where they feel like their voice is actually heard, which typically the suspend process doesn't give that person. We are also seeing that recidivism rates, thinking in the in the criminal justice setting, recidivism rates decline drastically if you engage in restorative practices. So by implementing these as well in schools, we see a lot of the same things. Less behaviors are likely to occur if we actually find the root cause and also hold them accountable to changing it.
And Chellie, is there anything else you'd really like for teachers and school administration to understand better about the restorative justice practice that maybe they aren't using right now or they're not tapping into?
Absolutely. So I think one of the most important things for those who are interested in engaging in this work is really that this is a relational approach to working with youth, but that also means that we have to check our own biases that come in with that. Having a punitive approach in the classroom is really embedded in you from teacher training. Don't smile until October. Make sure you lay down the rules very strict, and so everyone knows that you don't play. And the thing is like, it's actually okay to play. And it's actually okay to get to know our youth and let them help you sculpt the community, because the more that they are able to engage and take part in this community, the more likely they are to protect the community. And that's what a circle does. A circle takes care of the circle, right? And so that is one of the things that I think when we break down those power dynamics and we say, you know what, we're all in this together, right? This is our school and how do we take care of it is a lot better than the punitive approach.
Wonderful. And Fatema, can you tell us about the approach that your organization, Leadership SAISD, is taking to address and combat educational inequity in San Antonio ISD's public school system?
Yeah, Leadership SAISD has been going on for about 6 years now, and it was actually started by community members and parents in San Antonio ISD to work on educational inequity issues, essentially. So what we do is we gather leaders, and Chellie is one of those leaders this year. We gather leaders for a 9-month-long class series. We meet once a month, and we learn about different topics affecting educational inequity. So we take community members who maybe are former teachers or interested in education, but who really work in a variety of fields, and we teach them about different topics affecting the public education system. And the idea is that once people are more knowledgeable and more educated about things going on, they play a bigger role, whether it's running for school board or joining a nonprofit board or working at a nonprofit. They go out into the community and make impacts.
That's wonderful. Overall, what types of public policy decisions do you think would be most helpful now to foster and end educational inequities in Texas?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that really needs to be done around school finance. We have to think of better ways to fund and sustain school systems and ways that are a little more fair. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. There's a lot of work that needs to be done around school culture and climate, and a lot of that is around restorative justice and restorative discipline practices. It would be great to see lawmakers really researching and talking to teachers and learning more about what actually goes on in classrooms before making decisions. I think sometimes there's not a lot of transparency, and there's not a lot of work done to connect with people who actually work in the education system. So that would be a great first step.
Wonderful. And Chellie, is there any reason to believe that each school district in San Antonio embraces and utilizes restorative justice to the same extent as other school districts do?
So within San Antonio's context, I know that there has been conversations around restorative discipline and what that looks like, and that's kind of what Texas has adopted, which is a form of restorative justice, and in many cases I think could be implemented with fidelity. But restorative justice at its core, I haven't seen a model that's been done, implemented and still happening right now, I guess is what I would say. I've seen it in different contexts with different cities. Where I did my practitioner work was in Chicago where I saw it. And so I think when you do whole school, which is very important to say, you know what, we're not gonna have the in-school suspension room anymore, we're gonna have a peace room. We are really prioritizing what restorative justice is at its core. We need a space where we can work with youth to build community, to break down any barriers that they may be facing within their family, to address whole school. What are systems that we already have in place that are hindering our students? Because at the end of the day, I truly believe that all educators want what's best for their students. Mm-hmm. It's just sometimes we haven't figured out what are ways that we are already setting our students up to possibly become a part of this system. And really recognizing that none of our youth are disposable, right? Even our students who show up every day and maybe give us some behavioral issues, even those students are worth an extra look at and are worth an extra deep dive to say, what is going on here? How do I support you? Because in the long run, I'd rather send you to college than to prison.
Right. Mm-hmm. Awesome. And what challenges do schools face in switching from a zero policy approach to a restorative justice approach?
I think getting to the funding question kind of that y'all were mentioning just a moment ago is, what do we prioritize? If we actually look at funding, school resource officers are funded, right? Alternative schools are funded. Why wouldn't a restorative approach to making sure we're working through with youth those things, the things that they're facing? Many times we'll see one social worker per 3 schools. If we actually want to get serious about how to change the culture and we say we want to put kids first, then you're going to have to put some money to it and you're going to have to be willing to try something different.
Right. And how important are after-school programs in keeping students out of trouble?
After-school programs is another way to keep youth out of trouble, because if you look at crime rates, typically crime rates really peak around like 3 to 7, I believe is the time. Mm-hmm. And so what after-school programming can do is really help with giving the youth a place to be at. I would argue that they would also need that restorative justice lens as well. Since they're working with youth, we need to make sure that those providers as well are thinking deeper into how do we support youth and how do we get more people in after-school program, right?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Fatema, given the number of school shootings that our country is facing, some policymakers are proposing that teachers be armed. Based on your experiences as a teacher and now as an educator for teachers, is this a good idea? Why or why not?
You know, it just seems like such a band-aid to the larger problem and something that's so far off base that when I first heard that, I had to double take and make sure that it was actually said. Yeah. It's not a good idea for so many reasons, and to me the core reason that sticks out is just the safety issue. You know, we trust teachers to educate our students and love them and have them have a love of learning. And the idea is for students to feel like school is a safe place where you can express yourself and feel comfortable. I know I personally wouldn't feel comfortable going into a school knowing that my teachers are armed. I think that just invites so many issues.
And Chellie, how would you expect teacher-student interactions to be impacted if teachers are armed? Fatema kind of touched on that, but what's your opinion on that too?
Well, I think it goes back to the data that we're already talking about. If Black students are impacted at higher rates by suspensions, what would that do to their social and emotional well-being to know that in addition to me being looked at as disposable through the suspension process, if somebody possibly has a weapon on them, I would imagine that would cause a lot of discomfort for that student, and I would imagine behaviors would increasingly get worse.
Absolutely. We'd like for you to help our audience understand the role that elected and appointed governmental officials in Texas have played in the creation of educational inequities. Who makes the policy decisions about how to handle student disciplinary issues in Texas public schools?
It's really complicated because educational inequity comes so much from just cycles of poverty that have really affected communities of color. Especially in San Antonio. So it's not just a school system, it becomes laws like gerrymandering laws and the way districts are drawn and voting rights. All of that really plays into the educational system. We elect state senators and state representatives who do serve on committees that can help or hurt our school systems. We also have the Texas Education Agency, which does a lot of the implementation work. And those roles are mostly appointed, so it's really important to vote and elect people who you think are going to serve your interests and the interests of students at all levels, because they, at the end of the day, they really play a role on many levels.
Wonderful. And some people don't vote because they believe that all politicians are the same. Do all elected and appointed officials who work in educational issues in Texas have the same policy agendas for our public schools, or do they have very different visions for Texas schools amongst them?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who serve on the state Board of Education, on our local school boards, our state representatives, who all have different agendas and different opinions, and it's really important to research who you're voting for and know where they stand on certain issues. And if they don't have clear answers for you, or you don't see clear answers, you need to make sure you ask, because every role that's elected plays a hand in ensuring better schools for kids.
Fatema, GET works to motivate more young people to vote in Texas. Can you help non-voters understand why they should vote if they care about educational equity?
Yeah, absolutely. Education impacts every one of us and impacts students and families in our community, and the way to get your voice heard is really to vote and to elect school board members and every level of government officials who you think are going to do what's right for students. And like I said before, if they don't have an answer for one question or concern you have, it becomes your responsibility to get an answer from them and then vote and inspire your friends to vote.
Wonderful. How about you, Chellie? Do you vote, or did you take interest in the civic process?
Yeah, so I definitely find voting as a way of harm reduction, essentially. Like, I think it's an opportunity for us to make sure that we are equipping ourselves with an individual who will be in office that'll do best by us. And so I think it's important to vote. I also served on a school board while I was living in Chicago, so I was an elected leader, and I could say that there are definitely individuals who are dedicated to making sure that life is better for individuals. And so it's important to, one, know who they are, and two, to be civically engaged.
Right. And Chellie, what excuse do you most often hear from young people who don't vote, and why they don't want to vote or why they don't plan to vote?
So I've heard a few different reasons. Thinking after this past election, one of the ones that was most common that I heard was not understanding how to navigate the system. So different states also require different things. And so where do I go to vote, right? Making sure that there's awareness around where to go to vote, what to bring, how to be prepared before going in, because you get this sheet of paper with all these people on it, and it's overwhelming, especially if you haven't done your research going in and maybe just wanted to vote for one person. So I think really teaching our youth, or any individual, honestly, because I've heard older people as well say this, is I just don't know what to do when I get there, or I don't know how to get there. So helping them navigate the voting process. So how do we bridge that conversation between community organizations and the schools? Because ultimately, they should be working hand in hand.
Absolutely. So we'd like to thank Fatema and Chellie for joining us today on the GET stage. We're inspired by the work they're doing to ensure that every student in San Antonio and across the country has equitable access to quality education in our public schools. You can learn more about these topics and our organization, Growing Empowered Together, by visiting the sites listed on this screen. Thank you both for being here. I think everyone learned a lot, and we are so glad to have you in our community. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.